Good afternoon. I am Dr. S.K. Gupta. Today I am going to discuss overview and importance of valuation under insolvency and bankruptcy court. You would all tend to agree with me that the world is changing, and the world is changing very, very dramatically and very, very significantly. I am not only referring to the last 2 years when the world as a whole has been faced with unprecedented COVID-19 pandemic situation, but even otherwise, if you look back 2 or 3 decades, there have been very, very significant changes that have taken place in this world which have changed the way we live our life and also the way we work in different organizations. It's a VUCA world. The world is highly volatile, especially the business and economic world is highly volatile, very uncertain, hugely complex, and very, very ambiguous. And such a dynamic business and economic environment, the businesses have to be very, very agile. They have to be governed by various appropriate laws. And end of the day, they have to become sustainable with a view to providing various products and services which are required by the people living on this planet. In this business world today, we have lots of new age companies or startups which are mushrooming all over the world, including India. India today has more than 100 unicorns. We are second only to Silicon Valley of the US in terms of number of startups which are happening here. But if you look at the performance of these new age companies or even the well-established old companies, we find that many of the companies have cashless turnover or profitless turnover. They have a good enough top line, but end of the day, there is no profit. Or there is cashless profit. They have a good enough bottom line, but end of the day, there is no cash or liquidity available. But in spite of such bad financial condition, these companies today in the marketplace enjoy huge soaring valuations. Very high valuations are being enjoyed by these companies, which unfortunately, for whatever reason, are not so doing very well in terms of their financial position or financial standing. What happens that when the market forces are at play, or when the market is governed by the market forces of demand and supply and the customer demand and customer expectations, it is but natural that some of the businesses may not be able to survive in the marketplace for a long period of time, and there might be some failing businesses. At that point of time, what is required is we need a law by which we can pull out resources which somehow get stuck in inefficient uses, pull them out, put them back into productive channels for the benefit of overall economy or the country as a whole. Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code 2016 was passed for the specific purpose of rescuing failing but viable companies. Failing but viable companies. Those companies which might have failed, might be in the failing state as of today, maybe because of technological change, maybe because of poor management, maybe because of financial problems, whatever be the reason, but if they are rescuable, if it is possible to rescue them, full effort is being made to rescue them and put them back onto the path of recovery. That is the key objective that we have in terms of the IBC. The various objectives of IBC that we have are, it provides timely resolution for the distress of the companies. It tries to maximize the value of the assets of the company. It also seeks to promote entrepreneurship, because somebody who wants to become an entrepreneur essentially requires three kinds of freedom. Freedom of entry. It should be easy to enter into any business. Freedom of continuation. It should be easy to carry on the business. And finally and lastly, why not? Freedom to fail, freedom to exit. That's what is being provided by Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code 2016. Another objective is promoting credit in the marketplace. The banks and financial institutions, they'll be more encouraged to provide credit to the companies in case they know that they have some kind of a way out. In case a company gets into some kind of an economic or financial problem, they have some way out to recover their amounts due from them, and that's where IBC comes into play. And the last objective is balancing the interest of all the stakeholders. That's the key. When a company gets into a failing situation or a situation of distress, there are shareholders of the company, there are creditors, operational creditors, financial creditors, employees, government, society, there are various stakeholders. IBC seeks to balance the interest of various stakeholders while trying to provide resolution of a company in distress in a time-bound manner while balancing the interest of all the stakeholders. Valuation is key in the whole aspect or concept of IBC. Because when you try to arrive at resolution of a company in distress, you have to identify a resolution applicant who is going to submit a bid for taking over that company henceforth and trying to give it a fresh lease of life. How much worth the company has at that point of time when a company gets into a situation of distress is the key. And for that matter, the company is required to be valued as per the provisions of the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code. But let's first understand what valuation is all about. When you go to a market to buy anything, the seller quotes you a price. You don't take out your wallet and pay whatever is being asked for by the seller. हम ये नहीं करते हैं. We don't do that. We try to negotiate. We try to haggle. And then we end up or try to pay the price where the price and the value of the product is balanced in our mind. As an economic rational person, we always try to balance the price and the value. And therefore, there is a well-known quote by Warren Buffett which says, price is what you pay, value is what you get. When you go to a market to buy a product, maybe you decide to buy a shirt, there are branded shirts available and there are unbranded shirts available. A branded shirt would be costly, but with better design, better stitching, better cloth. But a local shirt would be less costly. Design may not be all that modern. Cloth also may not be all that very good. But then it depends. What is the value that you're seeking to derive from that particular product, and then you decide whether to buy a local shirt or a branded shirt. Price also differs from person to person. Value also differs from person to person. That is why we say value lies in the eyes of the beholder. Who is the person looking at valuing a particular asset? It differs from person to person because value lies in the eyes of the beholder. In the context of IBC, the provisions of the code mention that all the various assets of the corporate debtor are required to be valued by valuers who are registered valuers, and they are to be appointed 7th day and 47th day in between this particular time period. From the time an RP takes over the company, they are required to be appointed between 7th and 47th day. There are 3 registered valuer asset classes that we have. We need to have registered valuers for valuing land and building, plant and machinery, securities of financial assets. For each one of these asset classes, we need to engage two registered valuers. Valuation of assets is the key, because if the valuation is not proper, or if the valuation of corporate debtor in distress is not appropriate, we may end up in a situation where an unviable firm, a failing and unviable firm, might still be rescued, or vice versa, a failing and viable firm might also get into liquidation. Both of these are not social and economically desirable outcomes. Therefore, it is very essential that the corporate debtor in distress, the company under the IBC process or CIRP, must be appropriately valued so as to provide appropriate justification for a particular value to be assigned for the takeover of the company by a new person, the resolution applicant, so that he can take care of the company going forward. What is valuation? Valuation is the process of determining the economic worth of an asset or a liability. Of course, we have to make various assumptions while valuing an asset, and there are various constraints and limiting conditions, and all that depends upon availability of data as on the valuation date. Valuation is a process of estimating the potential worth of an asset or a liability or a business enterprise. It's only an estimate of value, because the asset that you're going to acquire today, you are looking at what value it will provide to you in future going forward. And because the future is uncertain, nobody can be really sure as to how the future is going to fan out. It can at best be only an estimate of the value that you seek to derive by estimating and engaging in the process of valuation of an asset. Valuation is nothing but arriving at the estimate of the value of an asset, which is the monetary worth of future benefits one is going to have by acquiring an asset today. If you acquire a particular stock or a share today from the market at a price of 1,000 rupees, and this share had moved from 800 to 1,000 over the period of last 2 months, there is no guarantee that the same kind of upward trend will continue in this particular stock or share. But nonetheless, you have expectation of future economic benefits likely to arise from this particular share. That's why you have decided to put your money on bet in this particular stock, in this particular share, at this particular point of time. So valuation essentially is all about looking at the monetary worth of future benefits that someone can have by acquiring an asset or a liability or a business at this point of time in due course of time. Valuation depends upon a lot of factors, but the 3 key determining factors determining valuation: 1, who is doing valuation? Second is, why valuation? What is the purpose of carrying out valuation? Valuation may be required for very many different purposes. Valuation could be required for mergers and acquisition. Valuation may be required by the companies under the Companies Act 2013. Valuation may also be required for offering of ESOPs, employee stock option plan to the employees. Valuation may also be required in case of split of a partnership firm or a Hindu undivided family. What is the purpose of valuation also determines how the value is going to be arrived at. And then it is also important to identify the timing of valuation, when the valuation is being carried out. If you look at the value of any company and compare that value with the value prevailing in 2019 with the value of the company today, you will find huge difference in the value of the company because of the COVID-19 pandemic interval in between. Some of the businesses would have gone up in terms of value. Some of the businesses would have gone down in terms of value depending upon the sector into which the company or the industry belongs to, because COVID-19 pandemic has had differing impacts on various sectors. Some sectors have been benefited, some sectors have been negatively impacted. It all depends which sector you're talking about. Now, as I mentioned, under IBC, for a company under CIRP, valuation is required to be carried out by a person who is technically known as a registered valuer. The concept of registered valuer was introduced by the Companies Act of 2013 under section 247, which provides that any valuation required under the Companies Act or under Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code 2016 can be performed only by a person who is the registered valuer and not by anyone else. Let me clarify further that this provision of appointment of registered valuers is yet not applicable in the case of any other valuation under any other law or legislation other than the Companies Act and the IBC. If you need to get a valuation done for SEBI regulations, for FEMA, for Competition Commission of India, for income tax, anyone can do the valuation. It is not necessary to engage a person who is a qualified registered valuer. But for Companies Act matters and IBC, it is mandatory to have a registered valuer to be appointed for the purpose of carrying out valuation of the assets. Of course, the person to be appointed as registered valuer under IBC has to be an independent person so that he can provide an objective assessment or estimate of the value of assets of the corporate debtor. And in order to maintain independence of the registered valuer, it is therefore provided that relative of the resolution professional, any related party of the corporate debtor, auditor of the corporate debtor, a partner or director of the insolvency professional entity shall not be appointed as the registered valuer, even if he is otherwise eligible and qualified to be appointed. Having been licensed as the registered valuer, still we are not going to appoint him because of that kind of negative disqualification provided for under the code. Under the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code, 2 registered valuers are to be appointed for determining the value of 3 different assets falling under 3 different asset classes: land and building, plant and machinery, securities of financial assets, and that's where the importance of Regulation 27 and Regulation 35 become very, very important in this particular context. Now, the 2 registered valuers appointed under IBC, Regulation 27, read with Regulation 35, they are supposed to arrive at 2 different set of values: a fair value and a liquidation value. A fair value is arm's length price kind of concept, which states that the price at which the asset would be exchanged between a buyer and a seller, where both the buyers and sellers have complete knowledge about the market, they are willing to enter into a transaction, and there is no pressure on either one of them. The price at which the asset would be exchanged between the 2 parties in such a manner is what is identified as the fair value. And one of the important basis for determining fair value is the concern and assumption of going concern of the business. Assuming that the business is going to carry on its business, it's going to stay in the market for a long period of time, what is the fair price at which the asset or the business assets are to be exchanged between seller and buyer at an arm's length basis? That's what is the concept of fair value. Liquidation value, on the other hand, as the word indicates, the basis for arriving at liquidation value is the realizable value of the assets as if the business is going to close down as on the insolvency commencement date, if the business was to be closed down, if the business was to go into liquidation, what would be the value which would be able to be derived by selling out all the assets of the company? That's what is given by the liquidation value. The valuations, both fair value and liquidation value, provided by three different asset classes registered valuers, can be shared with the committee of creditor members only after taking an undertaking from them that they will maintain complete confidentiality with regard to these valuation figures and not divulge them to anyone else for that matter. How the valuation is conveyed by the registered valuers? Valuation is carried out by them by looking at financial records, by looking at other supporting documents and evidence, and also by carrying out physical inspection or physical verification of the various assets of the company. On that basis, valuation is arrived at by the registered valuers. How will the value be conveyed to the resolution professional? The value estimation arrived at by the registered valuers is conveyed to the resolution professional by way of a detailed, comprehensive, and well-structured valuation report. Valuation report is the end result of the process of carrying out valuation of the assets of a corporate debtor. It has to be structured in a proper manner. It must indicate certain basic contents which are mandatorily required to be stated in the valuation report, which have been provided for under the valuation rules and which are also provided for under caveats, limitations, and disclaimer guidelines provided for by Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code. All those contents need to be properly mentioned in the valuation report before it is provided to the resolution professional in respect of a company undergoing corporate insolvency resolution process. The end result of the valuation process or assignment, the final shape in which the report is going to emerge is, it will provide the name of the client. It will also mention who are the intended users, who are the people who are actually going to use this report or use this valuation number which has been provided by a registered valuer, and also mention the purpose of valuation. It could be for the purpose of mergers and acquisition. It could be for Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code CIRP. You got to clearly mention the purpose of valuation. Then in the second para or second section of the report, you're going to talk about description of the client company, description of the assets and liabilities, the financial matters, the legal affairs, the tax matters. Then you have to provide description about the financial position of the company in terms of past results, past financial statements, the budgets with underlying assumptions, the review of budgets for plausibility, checking whether they are achievable, realistic or not, and also statement of responsibility for the information provided by the management of the corporate debtor or by the resolution professional to the registered valuer for the purposes of coming out with the valuation report. Then coming to another section of valuation report where you have to mention what are the different bases of valuation which have been used. Have you used the going concern basis? Have you used the liquidation value basis? What is the valuation date? Because valuation differs from date to date, period to period. It's like the balance sheet. Balance sheet is prepared as at a particular date on 31st of March every year, end of the financial year. The position of assets and liabilities of the company as on 1st of April would be different. Again, as on 30th of March would be different, but the balance sheet is prepared as on 31st of March, a precise date. Similarly, valuation is also carried out as on a precise date, that is the insolvency commencement date. Then you have to also mention description of the various assets which have been valued, the principles which have been followed, the valuation methods which have been used, valuation approaches which have been followed. Now here it is also important to note there are three essential approaches to carrying out valuation. you have the income approach, you have the cost approach, and you have the market approach. First is, as a registered valuer, you have to identify which particular one approach or which particular two or maybe all the three approaches you would be using for carrying out valuation in a particular assignment, and then decide upon the particular thing and give reasons for that. Why did you choose the income approach to valuation in a particular case? And the other two approaches which you have decided not to apply in a particular assignment, you again have to provide sufficient justification for not using the other two approaches in a particular case. So you have to give justification for using a particular approach and also for not using the other approaches which are available to you as a registered valuer in a particular case. Appropriate and credible valuation is critical for the insolvency and bankruptcy code matters. Otherwise, what will happen is a viable company which is rescuable, which can be put back into operation, might get pushed into liquidation, or vice versa, an unviable company might be rescued. Both of these two situations will not provide the desired and required social and economic outcomes. So the point is that valuation is very, very essential. It is essentially the edifice on which the entire structure of IBC has been built, because if the valuation is not proper, the end result of the CIRP process or the liquidation decision taken by the committee of creditors may not be in the best interest of all the stakeholders concerned. Thank you.